There we go. All right. Okay, welcome. Good morning to all of you. It's wonderful to see so many people here in person for our first kind of online speaker. I'm Shannon Raisler. I'm the faculty director of the Hubbell Environmental Law Initiative and a professor here at the College of Law. And it's my pleasure to sort of MC this event today, moving forward. To start, I want to begin by thanking Fred and Charlotte Hubbell for their support for this program and all of our programs and all the opportunities they provide for students and for community engagement. We have really been able to build, I think, networks and community through this initiative. And we see that every time we hold an event and people show up from all different places, even when it's snowing outside like today. I also want to thank our program director, Blake Roop, who's never in the room when I thank her, but she's somewhere, for all of the logistics and the planning and the organizing. She is truly incredible, and she makes our events a success. And special thanks to the Iowa Environmental Council and Steve Geyer, and to the UI Labor Center, Robin Clark-Bennett, from whom you will hear this afternoon. They are our partners in planning and organizing this event. Each took on a panel this afternoon. So by way of brief introduction, I promise I'll be brief. We are here today to talk about the most significant climate legislation the United States has passed to date, about 18 months ago. Though it's called the Inflation Reduction Act, you won't hear much today about inflation. Instead, you'll hear about landmark legislation that commits billions of dollars to the U.S. transition to a clean energy economy. Through various tax provisions, loans, and grants, IRA or the IRA, you can pick what you'd like to call it, provides incentives for renewable energy, electric vehicles, and efficient buildings and homes, all key investments in the U.S. effort to reduce carbon emissions. A year into IRA's implementation, the Department of Energy estimated that the incentives in the legislation and the bipartisan infrastructure law will cut U.S. net greenhouse gas emissions by 40% below 2005 levels by 2030. So that's good news, right? A report from last August. But as you will also hear today, many of the tax provisions offer bonus credits for projects that are located in economically distressed communities, traditional energy communities, and tribal lands, as well as for projects that meet requirements to pay prevailing wages and hire qualified registered apprentices. Several provisions also offer bonus credits for projects that meet certain domestic content requirements for steel, iron, and other manufactured products. In short, IRA is not simply climate legislation, it's industrial policy. We are fortunate to be able to explore these policy commitments in more detail in the panels this afternoon. So now it's my pleasure to transition us to our first speaker, the keynote session this morning. We are really fortunate and thankful to have Kristin Eberhard here with us. She plans to talk about how and why electrification is important to U.S. climate goals and how IRA furthers those goals. States have an important role to play in this, especially with respect to the rebates to individuals who make home improvements toward energy efficiency and electrification. She may be able to share some of what states are doing, some of these national trends that we're seeing since the bill's passage. We should have plenty of time for questions, and the logistics of that is always somewhat challenging. What we've done for those who are present, who are in the room, is we have these note cards just throughout the room. So we encourage you to write your question as legibly as you can. And Blake and I will be looking at the end of Kristin's talk for the note cards, right? And I will sift through them and pose some questions as time permits. Kristin's also offered to try to sift through some of the online questions. But for those of you online, welcome, by the way. please have patience, right? Because if there are a lot of questions, obviously we can't get through all of them. So let me introduce Kristin, and then I'll turn it over. You have a program, so I won't read her entire bio, but I do want to note that she's Senior Director of State and Local Policy at Rewiring America, which is the leading electrification nonprofit working to electrify homes long before this legislation was passed, part of the effort that resulted in the passage of it. She previously served as the Director of Climate Policy at the Niskanen Center and the Director of Climate and Democracy at Sightline Institute, and as the Western Director of Climate and Energy at Natural Resources Defense Council. And I can tell you, read her bio because she's written a book and done all kinds of other wonderful things. And we are delighted to have her with us today. So with that, I will turn it over to her. Thank you.
Hi, thank you for that wonderful introduction. And hello to everyone. I'm sorry I can't be there in person, although I'm not sorry to not be stuck in snow. So thanks for everyone who is there or listening online. Let's see. Oh, we didn't test me sharing my screen. It won't let me share. Let's see if it'll... I'm sorry, we didn't do the full.
I'm gonna troubleshoot, but this.
I think. Hang on.
Try that. Will that work?
Let me see. Oh, it's telling me I need to quit and reopen.
Okay.
I will be.
Well, back in a moment.
Back in a moment. All right.
Haven't we all learned to just kind of roll with the technological issues, right? I appreciate your patience. And when in doubt, you should just always restart, right? In fact, we need to do that before we bring in IT, because that's the first thing they'll ask. There she is. Okay.
Okay. Now let's see if it works now. Here we go. Great.
Great.
Okay. Wonderful. So I am going to talk, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the IRA today. Let me just get my... Great. Okay, so I'm going to talk about first giving you just some context of why electrification matters for U.S. climate goals, and then talk about this Inflation Reduction Act and how it's going to help, and then what states can do and what some of your neighboring states are already doing, and then we'll have time for questions. So let's just start with the basics of what we have to do to stabilize the climate in the next few decades. And it's conceptually simple, but of course not actually easy to implement. But the basic idea is we need to get all of our electricity coming from clean sources and then use that electricity to power everything that we can. And we can power almost everything, not quite everything, with clean electricity. So the basic idea is, solar and wind, and then electrifying everything in this picture here is a heat pump. They're not always as pretty as that, but that's the idea. So I'm going to just start with the first half, this 100% clean electricity. And, the basic idea is we've got power right now coming from coal, burning gas, and instead we need to be getting it from wind and solar. But if you'll bear with me, I'm going to just dive deep on this for a second, just so that you can see where we're coming from. So these are the energy flows in our economy. On the left are all the sources, solar, nuclear, hydro, wind, etc. And then as you flow across the graph, it's what we use it for. So first, what we're talking about is this section, the electricity, and getting it to be 100% clean. So right now, most of our electricity in the country is coming from coal and gas. We need to stop that. And pump up our wind and solar. And this graph doesn't, geothermal doesn't even appear on the graph. So I added geothermal, wind, solar, and geothermal, non-polluting renewable sources. And so once we're working on that half, making sure our electricity is clean. And then the other part of the equation is electrifying everything that we can. So that means taking these things that are burning fossil fuels in our homes and converting them to something that uses electricity in our homes. And this is the idea that Rewiring America was founded on. We're a nonprofit, we're just a few years old, and we're founded on this idea that we need to electrify everything that we can. And this came from the, information that 42% of our energy related emissions are from decisions that we make around the kitchen table. So that means that we're operating these little fossil fuel power plants in our homes. It's the cars we drive, how we heat our air, how we cook our food, how we dry our clothes. A lot of those things are burning fossil fuels in order to get us those services. And we have options to not do that. So when you add it all up, all of those clothes dryers and air heaters and water heaters, it's 1 billion machines that we need to switch out from fossil fuel burning machines to electricity by 2050 for a shot at keeping the climate at 1.5 degrees C warming. Okay, so back to our energy flows. A big part of the solution here is all of this wasted energy. So when you look at these flows, less than half of the energy that we're putting into the economy is actually coming out in a useful form, and the rest of it is being wasted. And that is something that's sort of inherent in fossil fuels, that when you burn them, you just can't capture all of the energy from the burning. Some of it escapes in waste heat. And so by electrifying things, you can actually just utilize more of the energy that we're already putting in. So this was the other founding idea of Rewiring America, is that we found that if you can get rid of those waste streams that are mostly coming from fossil fuels, you can actually power the whole economy with half of the energy and none of the emissions. So no sacrificing, you still get your dry clothes and hot water, but just without burning and polluting from those fuels. Okay, so back to our graph. Here was the idea. We're getting rid of that coal, gas, bumping up this wind, solar, hydro, and then we're growing that electricity's piece of the pie and using it to power other things, like our vehicles, which are right now mostly powered by oil. They can be powered by clean electricity instead. And our buildings, which are right now use a lot of natural gas, and they can use electricity instead. So Rewiring America is particularly focused on that residential sector. And here's just to really drive this point home, the waste just in the residential sector, again, it's more than half of the energy going in is getting wasted. And so that's why we have a mantra that electrification is the efficiency. Because if you take a gas furnace in your home and you get a more efficient gas furnace, you might reduce your energy use by 10%, but there's still a lot of waste heat coming from that gas furnace. Whereas if you switch it to a heat pump, the heat pump uses all of the energy usefully. And so you reduce that waste to almost nothing. So here's the electricity coming in. Here's all the fossil fuels that are coming into our residential sector, and they are being used to do space heating, water heating, cooking, and other appliances that are in our homes burning these things. So big picture, what we have to do to stabilize the climate, here's a bunch of policies that Energy Innovation put together for how we can actually get down to our emissions goals under the IPCC. And you'll see that buildings are a relatively small piece of that puzzle, but they're tied to all of these other important things. They're tied to having equitable housing stock, to making it easier to have 100% clean electricity, because if you can manage your load, then you can manage the supply side, and to union power if we can do these jobs right. So that is the picture of why we need to electrify, how it fits into our bigger climate and energy flows. So now let me tell you a little bit about the Inflation Reduction Act, which was passed and has already started moving money into this electrification sector in every community in the nation. So the IRA has a lot of different buckets of money. There's the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund with $27 billion. There's tax credits to individuals and businesses. There's rebates to individuals. There's community block grants. So there's a lot of stuff going on to sort of push both households, commercial building owners, and manufacturers of these equipment to really start to up the game in the United States and electrify and also create jobs while doing it. So Rewiring America's focuses on the residential sector. So I'm just going to dive a little bit more into what the IRA means for homeowners as well as landlords and renters. So the first big chunk is there's all these tax credits. There's tax credits for your heat pump, your water heater, weatherization, for solar on your roof, for buying an EV, for getting an EV charger. And those tax credits are all available right now to anybody who has a tax liability. And they are uncapped. So the more people who utilize these, the more money will flow into the economy. So anybody who wants, who has a tax liability can go and get 30% off their heat pump if that's something that they're able to do. They can get 30% off their solar and storage battery systems. So anybody who is thinking of buying a new car or thinking their furnace is about to go out, tell them about this because these are uncapped. So the more the merrier. And then down at the bottom there's the rebates. Those are not available yet. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about those. Home energy rebates, they will, depending on the state, they'll be rolling out in states either later this year or next year. And there's two types of rebates. So one is the electrification and appliance rebates. So these are for, your heat pump water heaters, cooktop, clothes dryer, and then for any wiring upgrades that you need in order to, make that work. And also for weatherization to make sure that your heat pump is, not heating any more than it needs to because of a leaky house. And there's $4.5 billion in these rebates in the next decade. And these are all aimed at low and moderate income homeowners. So if you're low income, it'll cover 100% of the project cost up to the maximum rebate is $14,000. And if you're moderate income, it'll cover 50% of the cost. The other bucket of rebates is efficiency rebates. So this is more about making your home more efficient. And it is the amount of the rebate is based on the savings. So if you do a whole project and it reduces your household's energy use by 20%, then you can get $2,000 or 50% of the project cost. And so these rebates also can be used for heat pumps. So they're more aimed at like weatherization, retrofits, but you can also use it for heat pumps, and you can put these two programs together to do a whole house project. And again, these are open to any income, but the incentive is more for lower income households. And this is just to give you kind of a sense of how much money we're talking about here between these two rebate programs. Iowa will get 121 million. So it's not going to fix everything, but it is a nice chunk of change. So we get a lot of questions about, does this work for landlords and for renters? And in fact, for both of those rebate programs, 10% of the money has to be set aside for low-income multifamily buildings. And then there's additional tax credits and tax deductions. So there's a commercial building tax deduction, developer home credit, and low-income communities bonus credits where you can up the amount that you get if you're doing it in a low-income community. So this is not only for homeowners, it is definitely is aimed at helping increase the building stock and at getting more resources directed at low-income renters and owners. And then as a renter, the main thing that you can do is really talk to your landlord about the fact that these are available and that, there's a set aside for multifamily buildings. And you can use it on certain things that you can bring with you. There's also, the EV credits, and one of the things that the IRA did was make the EV tax credit available for used electric vehicles, which was not previously true. So you can buy a lower cost used electric vehicle and get a tax credit off of it. And then one of the kind of simplest things you can do, and there's not a credit for this, but you can get an induction hot plate that you can just put on your countertop if you don't want to be using your gas stove that is emitting pollution into your home. So I mentioned that these rebates are not available yet, but that they are rolling out later this year or perhaps in 2025. So this is kind of where states are with that timing of the rollout. So far, 4 states, the brightest yellow states, have applied and are on track to get those rebates out the door to customers soon this year. There's another about half a dozen that are working on their applications right now, and then another 7 states that have indicated that they are expecting to finish their application this year and probably have the rebates early next year, and Iowa is in that bucket. And your neighbors, Minnesota and Wisconsin, are in the bucket, ahead of you, that they're working on finishing their applications within the next couple of months. Okay, so I mentioned, our focus at Rewiring America is on the residential sector, but the IRA has a lot of things also for cities, schools, and communities. So one of the biggest innovations or advancements in the IRA was this idea of direct pay. So public utilities, local governments don't have a tax liability. And so previously they have never been able to take advantage of any of these tax credits. So the IRA actually allows for direct pay of a credit even to entities that don't have a tax liability. So that means now that your school district, your city hall, if you have a publicly owned utility, those entities can now all get the tax credits from the IRA. There's also a lot of assistance, money to help a local government agency do a thing that they might want to do, but just haven't, they haven't had the staffing or the capacity to do it. So for example, building code updates, building codes determine how the quality of the buildings that get built in your area. And a lot of times there is, sometimes it's done at the state level, but sometimes it's done at the local level. And sometimes those entities get behind on their code updates because, it takes some staffing to do. So the IRA has money available to help you hire the staff to do what you need to do to upgrade your building code to the latest, most efficient standard. There's also, as I mentioned, the ITC, the investment tax credit, has been around. It was extended in the IRA, and like I said, the big innovation is made it available to local governments or other publicly owned entities. Same with the production credit. There's, the investing in the thing, and then getting the money back for the actual energy that comes out of the solar panels or whatever it is. And same deal, that's now available. And then I mentioned this commercial building deduction. This is, again, helping building owners to get a deduction for every square foot of something that meets a certain level of energy efficiency. And then the block grants, that was one of the, the sort of buckets of money. There's about $3 billion available for community-based organizations to carry out projects in their community. That could be, it could be building electrification, could be workforce development, could be air pollution monitoring, just things that are going to assist their community. Okay, so there's a lot of buckets under the IRA, a lot of things available. But in addition to that, states and local governments have the ability to enact additional sort of complementary policies to, further boost this movement that the federal act has started. So here's just some broad categories of things that state and local governments can do. So I think of them as intentions, setting a goal. So saying we have a goal of reducing climate greenhouse gas emissions reductions by this much, or we have a goal of installing this many heat pumps, or we're just going to tell our public utility commission that they should consider climate goals. So those are all sort of just setting out the intention that this is a thing that we care about without necessarily having the teeth yet. And then there's rules, so building codes and performance standards. And again, like the IRA has money to help state and local entities update their building codes. Clean heat standards are another kind of a flexible rule that says any entity that provides fuel for heat in our state has to, over time, reduce its emissions content. So it's a way of just pushing the market towards the cleaner heat options over time. There's money. I know that often local governments in particular are strapped for money, so might not have a lot to give in grants and rebates, but there's, your own local procurement process that if you're going to be spending money anyway on upgrading, your government buildings or your school buildings, community centers that often have very inefficient old boilers. And when those boilers come up for replacement, saying we're going to prioritize getting the cleanest option, and usually the cleanest option is an electric option available. And then there's a lot of stuff around utility regulation. Utility regulation is done at the state and local level. So this is something that state and local actors have control over, getting their utility regulators to allow utilities to invest in fuel switching, which means if a customer has, a gas furnace, that it's okay to give them a rebate to put in an electric heat pump, even though that is switching between two fuels. Planning for the gas system. Right now, utilities are spending a lot of money repairing and replacing pipes, but with the expectation that we are then going to be burning that gas often for like 80 years in the future is their plan. And that is, especially if your state has any kind of climate goals, those two things are incompatible. So getting the utility regulators to get the utilities to think about, like, what are you really going to do that is compatible with our climate future? Okay, so I'm just going to tell you a little bit about some of the things that your neighbors are doing. So Illinois allows for a local stretch code. So this means that the state as a whole has a building code, but it allows localities to take that code a step further. They have a model code that localities can say we actually want to be more efficient than the state level code. It allows on-bill financing. That means that your utility will pay the upfront cost of upgrading to more efficient or cleaner equipment, and then you pay it back over time on the bill. And if that upgrade got you savings, it means your bill could be the same. So you had no upfront cost and basically the same ongoing monthly cost to get an upgrade to your home. They recently passed this bill saying that they're going to get to zero emissions power and saying they're going to prioritize environmental justice communities in that transition to clean power. And then they do say that their PUC has to think about decarbonization as part of the regulation when those utilities are coming in with their rate plans. Are they looking at a decarbonized future? Minnesota also allows fuel switching for utility investments. And then they recently created this heat pump coalition that is working with utilities, manufacturers, and contractors. They're all working together to increase heat pump adoption in the state. And they have a utility planning process to think about how gas fits in to the utility future. Michigan, they are running an all-electric new homes pilot. It's a small pilot, but it's, hoping to show what it actually looks like to get these all-electric homes and to help train the contractors who do the pilot so that then they are all trained to go out and do other homes. They also have a requirement that the PUC has to consider decarbonization, and they have public bonds to help accelerate coal plant retirement. So basically to take some of that pressure off of ratepayers, but still allow those coal plants to start shutting down. And then Wisconsin has a policy for net metering, which makes it more affordable to do rooftop solar. So if you want to know more about what state and local leaders, like what's within their power to do, we have a whole menu of options. So if you think, well, grants aren't an option for us, but like maybe adopting the local stretch code could be. I'd be happy to send this to you and to talk more. We have one for the local level of government and one for state level things that you can do. Okay, so that is all like the IRA, what state and local governments can do. So I just want to talk a little bit about what you can do and how rewiring can help. So we have this calculator that you can log in and see how much, what incentives and rebates are available from the federal government. And we are right now working on rolling it out. Do I have it? Yeah. To also include all state and utility incentives. So as we're hoping to roll out about 20 states this year, I'm not sure if I was on the list, but we do want to get to all 50 so that anyone in the state can, come to this website and see any federal, utility, state, local incentives that are available and how they can put those all together to get an electric appliance. We are training electric coaches in every community. So, there's a lot, this is kind of new for a lot of people. There's a lot of questions, like how do I do this? Or how do I pick a contractor? So we're trying to train in every community that you can call somebody who is, lives near you and knows a lot about this and can just like help walk you through some of these issues. And they're not trying to sell you anything, but they're just trying to help you think through this. And you can become one of these. We just started our second cohort of training. And so if you are interested, please get in touch and we can put you on the list for our next cohort. We have a coalition of local government leaders for electrification. So these are mayors, council members, who are, who have some weekly calls. We share information with them, and then we contact them about things that are happening at their state or local level that they where they could play a leadership role. And then just telling people, I mean, sometimes, people don't know. I think often people, when they hear electric, like especially electric stove, they think of like the old electric resistant stoves, which are not the same as a new induction stove and are not as good. Or when they hear, an electric furnace, they think of an electric resistance furnace, which again is like very inefficient, much more expensive to operate, wastes more energy compared to a heat pump. So just letting people know that there's this new generation of technology out there and that it's, uses less energy, has almost no pollution, depending on your source of electricity. The more people that are talking about it, the better. So thank you so much for having me here today and for being part of the electrification movement, I hope, and I'll be happy to take questions.
Very good. I'll come around and collect the cards while I'm doing that. Kristin, can you see any questions in the Q&A on your end?
Hang on, let me. Oh yeah, I do.
At the bottom.
Yeah. Here, let me take a look.
Okay, so I'll be back. She can't see me unless I think I'm down here. But I'm going to just walk around the room and get the questions here while you look at the questions there, and then we'll get started.
Yeah. Okay, so we've got a question about sprawl, sprawl and climate related immigration. Okay, I'll just read it. How should Iowa prepare to accommodate millions of internally displaced persons fleeing rapid sea level rise in coastal USA without sprawling further over the world's best farmland? Should Des Moines consider overlaying a car-free community upon its freeway loop, hosting 100,000 or more, as suggested by the Lady Foundation? And I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with the Lady Foundation proposal, but certainly having a a and I'm not sure if there's a existing policy like this, but having a policy of where you can develop and then allowing more dense development within that area. So I don't know what Des Moines policy is like, but a lot of cities have a requirement that you have parking spots in every new development, or a requirement, that everything is single family zoned. And so you can't build up, you can't build townhouses, you can't build apartments. So certainly just allowing that building to accommodate more people, if that's the what you're seeing in the demographic trends, is that there's going to be more people than housing. Just allowing housing to be built is key, and allowing it to be built in the places where people are already living and there are already jobs, rather than sprawling out into farmland, certainly. Electric rates vary considerably by state. For example, Iowa has 12.81 cents a kilowatt hour and North Dakota has 10.74. Why such variation? Can you speak to effective strategies for reducing electric rates and their variability? Yeah, electric rates obviously are hugely important for this transition, because as we're trying to encourage more people to use electricity, for their heating and their water heater and all of that, if they're moving from a fossil fuel, then that's going to be more pressure on the electricity system. The reason for such variation, I mean, it depends on a lot of factors. Just what sources are nearby. So like in the Pacific Northwest, there's a lot of federally built hydropower, which is very cheap. And so prices are cheaper there just by that kind of historic and geographical luck. And it can also depend on the regulation. So most investor-owned utilities get a regulated rate of return, and that rate of return varies a little bit. And that is something that your Public Utility Commission has the power to determine. So certainly if your utility is getting a particularly high rate of return, that can affect rates. And that's a thing that you can influence your regulators to tie their rate of return to their performance, and their performance on a variety of factors, right? So you can say, how well are you serving low-income people? How well are you reducing your carbon emissions? How well are you increasing reliability? And your rate of return is tied to those things, rather than to just how much you build, which is how it is for most places now. And how to reduce their variability. I mean, the variability is kind of, like I said, it's geographic and state regulation specific, and each state is going to do things their own way. But I will say that the cost of producing power does vary by time of day and by season. So in times when there's a lot of wind, and basically because wind and solar are really cheap, they are cheaper than anything right now. They are cheaper than coal, they are cheaper than gas. And so if you have a time when there's a lot of wind power or a lot of solar panel power coming onto the grid, for wind, that's often at night, and for solar, it's of course during the middle of the day, then during those times, power is really cheap. And so most utilities, though, charge a flat rate, no matter what the time of day or the time of season. And so charging less for those times when the power is actually cheaper can then encourage these, as we're putting more of these electric loads into people's houses, you have your heat pump or your heat pump water heater, or especially EVs, some of those things can ramp up their use during the time when power is cheap and ramp it down during the time when power is expensive, which is not only beneficial to you as the consumer because you're, getting a lower rate, it's actually beneficial to the whole grid because you're making better use of that solar and the wind when they are cheap, which is then incentivizing the utilities to build more of those cheap sources, which is reducing the pollution as well as putting downward pressure on rates over time by utilizing your cheapest sources.
Thank you. I'm going to jump in, Kristin. Thank you
Yeah.
for that. And it's very hard to be a speaker and sift through questions. I'm going to try to take on this job today for the for Kristin and then for our moderators. And right now I can see kind of groups of questions. One really easy one, can we get these slides? And the answer is yes. As long as you are okay with that, we can make them available on the Healy website. Is that okay with you, Kristin?
Yes.
So yeah, so people are very interested in that. And then following on, because you were talking about renewables, wind and solar, Iowa, obviously very early adopter, and wind energy, it has a lot of wind, according to this question, 62% wind, but no storage. Now, this is a question coming, I don't know if that's true, but assuming that's true, I think this is a question about storage, right? Are there incentives in the Inflation Reduction Act to encourage the adoption of storage? You talked a bit about how renewables can offset each other, right? The solar and wind during the day. We have other ways to kind of deal with this, but I think storage is a component, right, moving forward.
Yes, and the tax credits are available for battery storage as well. So yes, there are incentives under the IRA for storage.
And then this is a great question, I think. And there are some questions, by the way, I'm going to hold for the state panel, the IEC panel, that I think we can address this afternoon too. This question: Iowa is a state with many small towns and rural counties with minimal technical capability to apply for and administer these programs. So what is being done to help small communities? I mean, you mentioned Rewiring's climate coaches, but I think this is a broader question of how smaller communities can access these incentives.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, is it for like residents in smaller communities or the like public, the city or the school district in a smaller community?
The question seems to note the community level, right? So counties and smaller towns. Yeah, so let's go with that first. And then if you want to say something about rural communities in general, I mean, there are incentives, right? In the Inflation Reduction Act that actually might target these communities.
Yeah. So for the rebates, one of the that it's taking, some people are concerned that it's taking states a long time, but one of the reasons are that there's a lot of requirements on the states. And one of the requirements is that they come up with a community benefits plan so that they have a plan for how they are going to reach out, especially to those lower income communities within the state, how they're going to partner with the local entity as well as with community-based organizations in those places in order to, make sure that they are reaching every corner of the state with the rebates. And then there's also under the IRA, like 20% of the money from the rebates is allowed to be used for administrative funds. And so some of those administrative funds can also be used to pay local partners, right? So to pay a local government or a local community-based organization to help with the outreach and the penetration of those programs in those communities.
So I think there's a set of questions around, I'm going to kind of group them together around the electrical appliances, right? So we can't assume everyone understands the virtues of the induction stove or the heat pump. And I think if you don't mind talking a bit, you touched on it in the talk, but I think people might want to know a little bit more about the kinds of things they could do in their homes, and what those technologies really are. Because one question, for example, is it's 27 degrees Fahrenheit today in Iowa City. Are heat pumps realistic in the residential sector in Iowa? Right.
Yes. Okay. So this is I think a question that a lot of people have, because perhaps there was an older generation of heat pumps that could not handle very cold weather. but this new generation can handle sub-zero temperatures. And in addition, there's an option to leave in place your existing furnace if so that it can kick in on the coldest day of the year to supplement the heat pump. But there are definitely heat pumps that can handle temperatures. And some of it is there is a question of cost. Like if you want to handle the most sub-zero temperatures, you can get a heat pump that will do it. There's been tests in Maine as well as in Northern Europe where it's very cold, that there are models that can handle everything, but they're more expensive. So you can get a less expensive model that can handle all the way down to I think it's like -15, and then have an additional backup that can kick in to give that extra boost when it's -25. And you wanted to know also just like generally about what the technologies are. Yeah, so there's the main things are for your air conditioning and heating needs is a heat pump. And I think this is like heat pump, the terminology is unfortunate because it's really a two-way air conditioner. It's, it works very similar to an air conditioner, but it goes both ways. It heats and cools. So for your HVAC needs, there's the heat pump. For your hot water needs, there's a hot water heat pump. And then for the stove, there's an induction stove, which is, it's not the old electric resistance. It's a magnetic transference. And so it heats up really fast and you have very good control over the temperatures. And then the final thing in your home is your dryer, which often dryers are run on gas, and there is a heat pump dryer option. And then, of course, your vehicle, if you have a vehicle, switching that out for an electric vehicle.
One follow-up, you might say, you mentioned this briefly in your talk. You noted that gas stoves emit pollutants. Not everybody understands that. People are quite fond of their gas stoves, right? That's why she keeps saying induction stoves aren't like the old electric, right? They're supposed to be more like natural gas. But maybe you could elaborate on that, some of the costs that we really don't fully understand to natural gas stoves, other than emissions, obviously, carbon emissions.
Yeah, so the gas stove, gas stove, you're burning gas inside your house, and so there's a reaction that releases pollutants into your home. And so there have been studies indicating that the presence of a gas stove in a house increases the chance that the people, and especially the children living in that household, will get asthma. So there's the greenhouse gas emissions, but there's also just a local air pollutant that is getting released into your home. And yes, and the induction stoves, I know people love their gas stoves and they love it compared to an electric resistance stove. And certainly the experience of cooking on an electric resistance versus a gas stove, a gas stove is definitely superior, but an induction stove is even superior to that. So we do have a bunch of professional chefs, who were maybe at first resistant to the idea. They loved their gas stove, but once they tried induction, they're now big fans and go around proselytizing for induction stoves because, and the thing that they talk about, if you're a professional chef, is that when they're running a kitchen, they know if they turn the induction stove to 5, that it's always going to be the same cooking experience no matter what. Whereas on the gas stove, they would be telling, somebody in their kitchen, well, turn it to medium, and the results would be a little bit variable. So the induction stove, it heats up very fast. It has minute levels of control if you're really a chef, and it's very easy to clean. It's just a flat surface that's easy to clean. And I have young kids at home, and I like that the surface itself is not hot. It transfers the heat directly into your pot. So your pot is hot, but once you take the pot off the stove, the top is not hot, and the top also cannot heat up if there's not a pot on there. So I have my kids in the kitchen cooking with me because I don't worry about them, accidentally touching the burner or accidentally turning the burner on when I'm not around, or there's, they can't, because the induction only works with the pot.
I have to say, as a personal note, I think induction stoves are pretty cool myself. Having used one, and I look forward to making this transition. Now, as someone in Iowa who's eager to do this, I appreciate this question. When can we start? What do we do, right? And we know you told us that Iowa's kind of on track for next year with the rebates, but maybe some discussion of the tax credits versus the rebates will help people kind of see where they might fall, and think about what they should do next.
Yes, the tax credits are available right now. So if you are somebody with a tax that you pay taxes at the end of the year, you can get 30% off the purchase of any of these things that we were talking about. So you can go to, so we actually have with a calculator that tells you about, the tax credits and all of the federal incentives. And we also now have a personal electrification planner. So if you're like ready to go, you're like, I want to do this, go to our electrification planner, rewiringamerica.org. And it will walk you through. If you tell it like, I'm ready to get a heat pump or I'm ready to get an induction stove, it'll walk you through, just, tell you more about the benefits, what you're going to get with this, and then help you figure out like, do you need any preparation to get it? Like, do you need any wiring upgrade? It'll help you look at your panel, and figure out like what kind of questions you could ask a contractor, how to find a contractor, and of course, how to get what you need to do to pick the right model to get the federal tax credit. And like I said, we don't have it yet for Iowa, but we will eventually have, if your utility offers any kind of incentives, or if your local government offers any kind of incentives, we'll have that on there too. But right now it's the tax credits it'll tell you what to do to get those.
We may have an opportunity to talk a bit more about this too this afternoon in the context of labor, right? Because a lot of this is falling on the contractors to track, and it's quite complicated, right? So we can pick up on this discussion, I think, later on today. There's kind of an interesting political question here about it's true. The Inflation Reduction Act it's the carrot approach rather than the stick, right? It's about infusing money into the economy and incentivizing this transition, and it depends then on revenue. So in your work for rewiring, do you hear? I mean, this is why won't taxpayers object? I think we might reframe that question in an election year to what is rewiring doing to think about? We've seen it be a kind of a hot button issue, right, in Congress. Are you worried? Are you anxious that some of these things could be on the chopping block, or do we feel like they're establishing themselves in the economy in a way that will be hard to roll back?
Yeah, I think there's sort of two ways to think about that. One is just the logistics, which is a lot of this money is already out the door, right? So it's not coming back. Even the rebates, which are not out the door yet, that money has already been appropriated, and as states apply, the contracts will get signed, and so that money will be, would be difficult, if not impossible, to claw back. So there's sort of just like a logistical question. And then I think the other question is the political question of, is this going to create blowback? Are people going to, be mad about this? And there, I think, the really interesting political dynamic of this electrification is that a lot of the benefits are going to redder states. So, I mean, I'm, rewiring is mostly focused on the residential sector, but under the IRA, there's also a lot of money for manufacturing, a lot of money for hydrogen hubs, for industry. And those just, by definition, are tending to go to redder places. So there's an analysis of kind of like where all of the money is going, and it is disproportionately towards redder states. And so I think as that money, especially for the manufacturing and industrial facilities, gets people start to see it at work, that's definitely a political it's much harder to say, oh, I don't want this money for manufacturing in my state, right? And even on the rebates, which are more evenly divided, it's each state gets kind of their per capita share. And we've seen only Florida is the only state that has indicated they might say no to that money, and even that is we're not sure they're going to actually follow through. They have until the end of the year to keep to that dedication. And every other state has said, yeah, we'll take the money. So I think that once there's money available and it's actually helping people and businesses in your state, it's a little harder to criticize and say you don't want that.
So I'm just scrolling through the questions. Some of them are super specific, so I'm gonna zoom out a little bit. You touched on electric vehicles. It looks to me like there's some questions about transportation, questions about electric bus fleets, right? What kind of mechanisms there are to support that for like a university or a school district. Maybe let's start there, and then I'll have a follow-up for individual cars.
Yeah, there was a lot of money for bus fleets, not in the IRA. It was in the I think it was in the IIGA that
Bipartisan,
the bipartisan
known, right?
infrastructure bill. And so that has been like schools are already getting started on getting that money because that was like the cycle before the IRA, and so there wasn't additional money in the IRA for school buses. So I don't know that much about it, except that it's been rolling out, and school districts have already applied for that and have already starting to make their purchases with that money. And I think you said vehicles. Yeah, so just the electric vehicle, it's a tax credit up to $7,500 for a new vehicle, $4,000 for a used electric vehicle. And there are requirements around that the vehicles be that they and their parts be manufactured and sourced in the United States. So not all electric vehicles are eligible, depending on where they're made and where their parts are sourced from.
So I'm going to follow on that. There's a question in online. I want an electric vehicle. I don't feel like I can afford it. And there are recent analyses that suggest it's still quite unaffordable for people. I'm curious to know, what Rewiring thinks about this moving forward. I mean, costs are coming down, but are they coming down more, quick enough? And how can we help people? It's the $7,000 tax credit may not be enough, right? To help people afford them.
Yeah, and definitely the upfront cost for a new vehicle is, for an equivalent new vehicle is a little bit more for an EV, but there are a lot of very affordable models. There's especially if you're looking for used. So Bolts and Leafs are used models are very competitive with equivalent used models, and then you can get that additional 4,000. What we've found is more that the charging options can be an equity issue. That if you don't live, in a place where you have a parking spot that you can, have a charger at home, it can be more difficult to, keep that vehicle charged up. It's most convenient if you can charge it either at home or at work so that you have like a reliable place to charge it every day. And so there's, often apartment buildings, you might not have a parking spot at all, or you might not have a reserve spot. And so getting charging into multifamily buildings is something that a couple other groups are working on and that we're very supportive of, to make sure that, if you are able to get your used Leaf with that $4,000 tax credit for an affordable amount of money, but now, you need to also be able to charge it to drive it.
Isn't it at point of sale? Some of those electric car rebates and tax credits are at point of sale, so you don't have to wait for the next tax year.
Mm-hmm.
Is that correct?
Can you hear that, Kristin?
Yeah, I did. And yes, thank you. Thank you for mentioning that. Yes, that was another thing that the IRA did is say that needs to be on the hood, right? Like you get that off immediately, and then it's the dealership that's applying to get the money back from the federal government. So you don't have to come up with the money and then wait until your taxes to get it back. So yeah, it's on the hood. And similarly, the rebates, which are rolling out later this year, are point of sale. So as the customer, you don't pay the full cost and then wait to get it back. You pay the discounted cost up front, and then the distributor is the one who has to, get it back.
Okay, I think there are a set of questions. This might be asking too much because they're pretty Iowa specific. So maybe this afternoon we'll have some thoughts on it. But people are very interested in how we can change attitudes in Iowa about heat pumps. So I'm hearing maybe that there's some sentiment that they don't work here, or that they won't work in our homes. I have to say, I recently had this experience myself with a contractor. So maybe the question is, is rewiring, you mentioned that you can go on the website and you can look for contractors. Are there resources out there for contractors that we can be connecting them to here in Iowa before we really get started right at the state level?
Yeah. So one thing I'll say is, we're doing some demonstration projects where we're electrifying like a few homes in an area just to show how it works, and to have somebody in the neighborhood who people can see it working. So we do have one demonstration project in Wisconsin where we're electrifying some homes to demonstrate, and we're hoping to do more of those. So sometimes just having somebody who you can see that it worked, and then also you then have at least one contractor in the area who knows how to install it. In terms of contractor training and development, I think most states have at least some training through their community college, and so if you don't, that's something to get in place. And there is, again, IRA money for workforce development. So getting Iowa to apply for that and make sure that you have a course, available through the community college. But we've found actually that a lot of contractors get trained through the manufacturer. And so talking with some of the major manufacturers about what their training looks like in Iowa, and I think it's there's a bit of a two-way street there, right? Like the manufacturer wants to make sure that there's enough market, so that if they're training people, that it's going to pay off for those contractors. And then of course the contractors need the training before they can go and tell people about the heat pumps. So being able to show, Iowa, Iowa's on track to be in the top half of states rolling out the rebates. That's a thing that you could talk to the manufacturers about, to sort of show there is going to be a market here for this. Let's make sure that we also, have the workforce to meet that need. So taking advantage of the IRA funds for the workforce development, talking to the manufacturers about workforce development, so that, that we have definitely heard that this is a problem, that people call a contractor and say, hey, I'm interested in a heat pump. And the contractor tells them, oh no, it's a terrible idea. It's not going to work. It doesn't work in cold weather, because they're not up on the latest technology. And so helping those contractors understand also how it works, and to be comfortable with, installing it and knowing that they know how to do it and they know how to maintain it, will be critical for helping people feel like this is something they can do.
That's great. One final question. We haven't, we touched on renewables. There's an interest in knowing whether nuclear energy is on the table under the Inflation Reduction Act.
There is money for nuclear, yes. So there's money for almost everything. There's a lot of money for hydrogen, some for geothermal, and there is some for nuclear too, yes.
Yes, and I will defer the questions on Iowa's specific issues like the carbon pipelines, maybe to the state panel. We won't go there, but people are obviously aware that is that those are being incentivized through this legislation as well. It's a very local issue here. Any final thoughts on your end? If you've scrolled through these questions that you want to address, we have just a couple minutes.
I'm just looking I see energy efficient windows are not eligible. So insulation is, duct ceiling is, but not windows. I'm an apartment owner, 5 to 50 units. So half of your tenants would need to be low income, and that can be shown. There's a list, and you can find this at Rewiring America, or if you look for the DOE's site of other federal programs that automatically pre-qualify you by income. So if you're in SNAP or WAP or Medicaid, you automatically can show that you're income qualified. So 50% of your tenants are, and you have at least 4 units, which you do, then you can qualify. And I think just the final thing is I hear the questions about, do heat pumps really work here? And I think that gaining that confidence and having more people, so like having more of our electric coaches in Iowa who you can call, who can say that I live here and I put one in and it works, or having these demonstration projects that we're doing, and having more contractors who are familiar and confident. That's the momentum that we need to start to build so that people feel like this can work here. I know people for whom it works, and I feel confident trying to go out and do this. In addition to, obviously there's the money on the table, but people need to feel like this is something that they want to get that money for. So certainly stay, if you have more questions about that, and we are working with contractors to figure out how we can help them market this or talk about it, because often contractors, even if they are sold on the heat pumps, they're not always sure like what's the best way to talk to people, customers about it. So we're working on that too. So if any of you want to be an electric coach or get in touch with our network of contractors, we are here to help.
Well, I think that's a good place to end. Thank you so much for your presentation and for being willing to answer questions. We so appreciate it. Thank you. So that concludes this morning's session. I think lunch is at 11:30 or so. Is that right in your program? Or now? I'm not sure. I mean, it's probably out there. So we will reconvene for our first panel after lunch. Question?
Yeah, so if anyone's interested in electric cars, driving for more than 10 years, so stop by at lunch and ask me any question you want. I'll be glad to help you and what I know.
Fantastic. We've got ambassadors in the room for electric vehicles, right? So anybody want to talk about heat pumps? We could do breakout groups. There we go. Awesome. I love it. All right. Thank you, Kristin. We appreciate it.
Thank you all.
Bye.